Hey everybody, welcome to 20Q, 20 questions with interesting people, where we learn the origin stories of everyday superheroes in the LGBT community and friends. I am your host, the very handsome Tim Kirk. Our guest this time is raconteur, bon vivant, man about town, Tate Barkley, recovering addict, alcoholic, and counselor to many people in many different areas of life. He's a practicing attorney. He's born and raised in a small town in North Carolina. And I'm going to start as we usually do. It's like, where are you originally from and what was it like?
I'll tell you, I'm originally from an area in North Carolina in what they call the Piedmont region. And I was born in Statesville, North Carolina, a long time ago. And Statesville was a very small town with very small town ways. When I was 12, my dad moved us to Houston, Texas, and that was a big life change for us. But those formative years were in North Carolina.
Really? And out of that experience there, what did you think had the greatest impact on you?
In North Carolina, what had the greatest impact on me, and I wish I could say that it was a positive impact, Tim, but it wasn't. The area I was raised in and the families, my mom's family and my dad's family were very, very conservative, and each belonged to a very fundamentalist religion. And the scope of what was right and what was wrong was very, very narrow. And sadly, you were your sins in the eyes of the people that I grew up with. So if you were an adulterer, you were always an adulterer. And it seems like the sins were talked about heavily, but the mercy and forgiveness part was forgotten that you read about in the Bible. So the fact that, by the time I was in, 6th, 7th grade, I was having those feelings of being attracted to other men, it was known very quickly. And from my dad and everyone in my world, that being gay, being homosexual was an abomination. And not only are we allowed to shame you because you're gay, but you should shame yourself. So sadly, that was probably the biggest takeaway from those times. I don't feel like that there were folks that hated me or didn't love me. It's just that what I knew that I was becoming, what I was feeling inside, was just not acceptable. It wasn't okay. And it certainly wasn't godly.
I had one of my a friend who actually was on the show. He was raised as an evangelical in Florida, and he was the town he grew up in was it's called Safety Harbor, which is the next town over from the Scientology headquarters. so he actually he had a few experiences, very tangential with them, but he grew up. And he was told that his parents were divorced and his father used him as a tool to pick up chicks. After a certain point, he was about 8 years old. They thought, a guy fathering a cute boy would be, and it was easy pickings for his dad. But his mom, of course, married several times, which was really kind of out of step with being an evangelical. And he became a Richard Dawkins atheist.
Who could blame him at that rate?
It's something he still struggles with so much, and it's the single biggest issue with his family. It's really surprising.
I have to tell you, Tim, my dad was, I don't know if any of your listeners know what this term is, but my dad was a bit of a flim-flam man. In my early life, he was always chasing that next get rich scheme. And as part of that, we may talk about it later, but he abandoned us for about 6 months. And then he decided to come back. And we were back in North Carolina after some get rich scheme he concocted in Florida. And my dad determined in the summer I was 6th grade, he says, my family name, they call me Bubba. And he says, Bubba, what we're going to do is you're going to come with me. So he was a traveling salesman, and his territory was all in North Carolina and South Carolina. So that summer, he said, now, Bub, he says, I think they're going to think that it's neat and really cute that I'm bringing my son to work with me. So what I need you to do is I need you to smile, and I need you to laugh when I say something funny. And if the ladies want to pat you on the head, you just let them pat you on the head, because I think you're going to be good for sales. So come on and let's go. So I appreciate your friend saying his dad used him to pick up chicks. And, my dad thought I'd be good for sales. I don't know if I was or not. We wound up going broke that time too. But, it was a fun summer. I got to see a lot. That's for sure.
It's funny that he told me actually, even though his parents were divorced, his father was, I wouldn't say protective, maybe a little bit on the obsessive side. But he would sneak out of the house, and I'm still amazed that they had a 2-story house where they grew up in Florida. I thought up until recently, you couldn't have a 2-story house because of fears of hurricanes knocking them down. He said he'd be leaving the house, and he'd suddenly get a phone call on his cell phone, and it was his father looking at him through high-powered binoculars several blocks away. He was still stalking his ex-wife. So anytime he would leave the house, Dad would say, "Get back in the house and do your homework." Yeah. So, and they also told me anytime he went shopping, he had to pass the smell test in front of all the church ladies. So he'd bring home everything with receipts that he got, and everything had to match, and it had to look, because, and his quotations was, "There's temptation." And this is how he broke free. And the only reason he came to New York was he was on a fairy tale. He was doing a Hail Mary, trying to follow a girlfriend who was basically trying to give him the rub off, and he didn't realize it. He was madly in love with her. And what happened was he followed her to New Jersey, and he finished his education in computer science, and he was a straight edger. And we were working at a startup which became the incubator that created Hulu. And he was working there several times a week. And everybody else is a whole lot more sophisticated and a little bit more New Yorky and worldly, even though some of them hadn't been from New York. But once you hear 6 months or something, you pick up a lot. Yeah. So he's brand new. After the second day of work, he looked at me, he said, "You're the first homosexual I've ever met in my life."
That's right, man.
So I said, I told him, I said, I didn't say it to him. I said it to myself. I said, "I'm going to be the best homosexual you ever met in your life." And 3 years later, I had him on the float.
I said, that's how you know you're dealing with someone whose views may not be extraordinarily tolerant, is because you're always a homosexual. You're not gay. You're a homo. Yeah. So yeah. I need to meet this friend because his experience is like that. Because when I was in that same summer, I was in 6th grade. My dad said, "You need to get in shape because you need to play football." Because where I'm from, you had to play football to be to be a boy, to be a man. You needed to play football. You need to show what you were made of. And I was a little heavy kid, so he says, "You need to run." So we lived out on this farm. We lived in a trailer, a mobile home out on this farm road. So he says, "You need to run all the way to the end of Bell Farm Road to Beaver's General Store, and you need to run all the way back. And you need to start. That's what you need to do to start getting in shape for football." So the first time I go and do that, I'm huffing and puffing, and I'm going down the road, and I hear something behind me. I'm so tired and worn out. I'm not paying much attention to what's going on. I'm just trying to catch my breath. And I'm huffing and I'm puffing down this road, trying to get this road. And then I finally hear something, and I turn around. My dad is following me in the car to make sure that I'm doing it. He had this big old 1968 Plymouth Fury. And then he's just scooting along about 50 yards behind me, making sure I'm doing it. I'm kind of like, in my head, I'm like, "What the, Dad? You don't even trust me to exercise." So
yeah.
So what the hell? I mean, he did it 4 or 5 times and said, "Okay, you're doing it," and then he didn't bother me anymore. But that was what it was like. Yeah, he was a character.
I have so many stories from so many other people who told me, their personal story, and everybody has a story, and everybody can tell you stories. But at least this doesn't seem as some of these people's stories. I wouldn't say they're depressing, but they're really, it's a little bit of a shock. There's a, you know,
I'll tell you, you know, and you know, parents are something, because you get the good and you get the bad with parents. And this same dad was also the one. I remember we lived in the same trailer, and for the first time, it was on CBS Evening News 10. And it was in 1977. It was the first time we ever saw any news about a gay pride parade. And it was I think it was the Gay Freedom Parade out of San Francisco when they first started doing those. And my dad's sitting in his chair and I'm laying on the floor, and this pops up and I'm watching it. And I remember my dad reaches over and he kicks me. And all he says is, Bubba, I better never. And I knew exactly what he meant. You know, he better never see me act like that. He better never see me conduct myself that way. And boy, that also had an impression too, because he had made it clear. He didn't obsess over it, but he made it very clear over what time we spent together when he said he was raising me, that he wasn't one of those narrow-minded fundamentalists, but he was certainly that good old boy Southern culture of, you know, you're not just a homosexual, you're a fag. And so it would be a long time before I would address these issues and this internal shame that I had built up about being a gay man over the years. And I'll be frank with you, for me, you know, my way of coping with trying to resist and repress who I was as a gay man was that coping that I did was done with alcohol and drugs. And that was just my coping mechanism. So because I lived in a world where, yeah, that wasn't okay. I mean, you were a fag. And the last thing you wanted to be at school, Tim, was a fag. I mean, it was just the last thing you wanted to be. So I was scared of being found out, almost from the moment I knew I was a fag,
I actually attended the same Catholic high school that produced Bill O'Reilly. So it was a Catholic all boys high school, and it was one of those things where the last thing you can imagine. And I have a myriad stories of everything from gang sexual assault to being told I was a liar and I was making it up as an excuse to whole loads of other things. And it turns out a year before Bill O'Reilly graduated, Glenn Hughes, who was the original Leatherman in the Village People, he also graduated there. So we had a lot of gay people, and almost everybody I went to high school with who was gay died of AIDS. Mm-hmm. And one of them is a friend of mine. He's still alive. He's actually doing very well. He's an attorney I think in New Mexico now. And he told me about all the people that were gay in high school, and I was like, where was I this entire time?
I just went to my 40th high school reunion, and over the years you find things out, and I'm like, and there was nobody was gay in my high school. Nobody was gay, and there was none of that going on in the class of '83. And so over the years at the reunion, I'm like, there were like 20 guys and like good looking guys that were gay. And I'm like, why in the hell?
Yeah. Yeah.
If we would have just spoke up every day, I tell people all the time, because I think about that high school experience where there wasn't a single gay person in my class. And when Harvey Milk said, come out wherever you are, what a great moment that was in our history. Because when I grew up in rural North Carolina, there were no gay people. There were no gay people, period. And whenever I came to Houston, we lived in working class neighborhoods, and there were no gay people. So, and that idea that if we started coming out and we started sharing our truth with everybody, that it would get easier for us, hopefully, and get easier for a lot of other people. It's just so true. Because several of us gathered at this reunion and we're like, yeah, it was just, they were all going through this same private hell that I was.
Yeah. Yeah.
And I'm hopeful that the progress that we've made over these past 40 years, let's say, I'm a little worried about keeping that progress in the current environment. But I'm just hopeful that maybe it is a little bit easier. But you know, it's hit and miss wherever you go. But it's so true. I'm so glad that people started coming out wherever they were, because it's made a huge difference. It gave me the courage to come out.
I have the luxury of living in New York City, but I've lived here for 32 years, and I was born in Brooklyn, and I worked and I went to school in the Bronx at Fordham University and stuff like that. So, I mean, my exposure to the gay community was early, and my parents were great to me too, by the way. So I don't have a whole lot of the issues. Everyone's got their issues with their parents, but mine weren't about being rejected, but for being gay. So I had that really good experience from both my parents. My mother and my father loved me, and that was terrific. And I was one of 6 kids, and we were Irish Catholic. But my dad was he was a Kennedy Catholic. He was JFK's campaign co-chair on Long Island, so he always left. Skewed left, and as he got older, he was surprisingly, because a lot of people got conservative as they get older, he was much more accepting and embracing. So and my mom passed away about 14 years ago. Since she was great. She was great with my husband. She loved him as well. So we had that. It was a very nice part of the thing. And I had nieces and nephews who, when I came out, it was the coolest thing in the world. They could tell everybody at school, "Oh, I got a gay uncle." And that was the best cultural currency you could actually get on the bus and talk about, So that they loved that. And I've also I'm in the middle of writing a book of all, and it's a memoir. And it's about a bunch of different things, but a lot of it has to do with my former poor choices. And I knew that being part of the gay community, one of the things that was so difficult for so many people to come out was to come out into a and I hate to just say it because it's not particularly intentional, but to come into a sober environment.
Yeah.
And because a lot of people don't really intend to be, they don't set it up to be a sober, but it's not the focus is to get high, distract yourself from who you are. It's actually to support people. So a lot of them don't have that luxury. That's the one luxury a lot of people don't have. And I've made notices. I'm actually writing about it because I've seen, especially guys who were younger, much younger than me, who'd go out. We'd go out to, say, like a happy hour, and there was a bar that was around the corner. That the building's even been torn down recently, but we would go there, and they were notorious for heavy pours at happy hour. So people were just walking out of there, just blitzed. And we would see this one kid, and he was with his friends, 4 or 5 friends. And you're a smart, bright, well-dressed, witty, well together young gay man. And this guy, he started to look a little like he had like his skin pops, and he didn't look so well. He had little rings under his eyes. And next thing he's staying later at happy hour, after the happy hour is over, and he's hanging out with guys who are substantially older and a little bit more shady than all of his other friends. And then all of his wisecracks stopped really being funny, and he kept on repeating them, and he started laughing at himself. And all of his friends abandoned him, and they didn't intend to abandon him. You could see that they just really couldn't put up with this guy doing this to himself. It's like, it's 9 o'clock. It's time to go home, or it's 10:30. It's like, you should go home. Don't be out till 2 o'clock in the morning where these guys are going to get you to do meth, and that's pretty much what happened. So you see, it's so easy, even in Manhattan. It's so easy to just get caught up in the world of distraction, because they're really complex issues, and there's so few resources for people to deal with and address their own personal demons.
Tim, whenever I first came out, I did not come out. I really struggled with being gay, and I did not start coming out. And it wasn't a grand announcement. It was kind of a slow process with people as I became more comfortable. And when I finally came out, I was 28, and I was living in Fort Worth, Texas at the time. And I had already graduated college and law school, passed the Texas bar exam, and I was a practicing attorney. I had my own practice, and that practice was doing pretty good. But I was well into my drinking at that point in time. I coped through drinking. That's just the way it was. That's how I coped with my life, drinking and prescription drugs. And when I finally came out to this guy that I knew, we weren't really friends, but we knew each other. When I finally come out to him, I said, I don't know anybody that's gay. And he says, well, you know me. And he hugged me. And the next weekend, we went to a gay bar. I was a nervous wreck because I'd heard all these stories about, oh my God, you'll get raped in a gay bar bathroom. And I literally made this poor guy go to the bathroom with me the first time I was in a gay bar. But I say all that in that all of my early experiences in the gay community were in bars. And I was comfortable drinking, and I soon became very comfortable in gay bars. And I went for one reason. I didn't go to get acclimated to my community. I didn't really go to create an extensive network of friends to support me through life. My goal was, I'm making up for lost time. I'm going to drink and I'm going to go have sex. That's what I want to do. And then within 4 years of that, really, I had, my alcoholism had reached a point to where I had lost everything. I could not get up and stay sober. So the clients went away, the referral sources went away, the law practice died, the house got sold, the car got repossessed, and I wound up back at my parents' house. But here's the kind of a lucky thing. I went back home with my dad, who was an active alcoholic, but eventually I got sober. And, I talk about that zenith moment in the book. But when I got sober, there was a place, I had to move back to Houston because I was living with my parents. I couldn't afford to live on my own. And there was a place called Lambda Center. And I was very lucky. And that Lambda Center was a place where there were 12-step recovery meetings for the queer community as a whole. There were crystal meth meetings, NA, Narcotics Anonymous meetings, certainly tons of Alcoholics Anonymous meetings, sex and love addiction meetings. And it was really there, Tim, that I started getting sober. And it wasn't until the sober me started having to deal with all these issues you have to deal with in 12-step recovery that I truly came to grips with being gay. Because while I was still actively in my alcoholism and addiction, life was sort of like this. I'll get drunk with you. I'll have sex with you. But I really don't want you in my life beyond that, because I don't want to deal with all you gay people. And because I still had so much internal shame about being a gay man that had been infused in me by religion, by parents, by kind of the world that I lived in. And I had to get sober to deal with it. And that's began my journey of finally coming to grips with being gay and being a proud, sober gay man. That took a little bit of work for me anyway.
Yeah, I can see that. I mean, for me, the irrational fear of being outed was something that kept me in the closet. When I finally told all my friends, they said, "Oh, really? Oh, we locked me up with a feather." Like, everybody knew.
So true.
Like, what are you talking about? It's like, we love you. We've always loved you. We always knew you would get.
My sisters did that. My sisters were like, I had 3 baby sisters, and when I came out to them, and they're like, we know that guy that used to come over when you were 16 named Rob. I mean, we knew he was your boyfriend. I had a relationship on the sly back when I was 16, and it's like we've known we've been waiting on you. I hear you, man.
When I was in high school, I used to have one guy who he passed away in 1987 of AIDS, and he was already having adult relationships. And it's one thing to be boys, to you're feeling your way through life. And I knew I was gay from the time I was 6. I mean, I always knew. But the shame of that. And then, you don't associate your mentality and your psyche with your desires, and you don't really understand how everything is intertwined until you actually start having relationships, and you see how it all comes together.
Right.
And this one guy, he was beautiful. He was on a swim team. He had green eyes. He had bleached hair from the pool, and then he had a DA. He was all feathered back in those days in the 70s, and he had the beautiful swimmer's body, and he had bee-stung lips, and he was already having adult relationships with other men. And he even had some sort of relationship with one of our teachers in this Catholic high school, who also died. And of course, Catholics, if you died in the early 80s, he had cancer, but we know that he died. He was gay. So, but he would get away with being able to talk to this teacher on a first name basis when it was absolutely verboten. Yeah. And you sit there, you tense up when you call him by his first name, and you on the teacher had to capitulate, because he knew that this kid in any moment could just spill the beans and and ruin this guy's career, and all that stuff. And this guy would come over to me in between classes, and he knew I was gay, and before I was consciously aware of that I was, transmitting or radiating the fact that I was gay.
Yeah.
And in between classes, he just like lean over and try to give me a hint, he would walk away, and I'd be like, huh, what the, and it took me forever to realize he was doing me the most favors of anybody I've ever met in my life. He told me, and he was, and he was trying to just like help me find my way. And I owed him a tremendous amount. He passed away in 1987. So and he actually put himself up as a model, so other people could see, take the live with dignity and talk and educate others on HIV and AIDS. And I just remember that I had that luxury of and I still had no clue, and it's very, very hard. It's a hard thing. I mean, I was going to the bathhouses and the movie theaters on 8th Avenue in Manhattan in the 70s. So that was my introduction to because I could still mentally separate myself. I could be the charming person or whoever I thought I was going to be charming about. And then I didn't realize that it's like, you could also be gay and do this. Isn't a shameful thing that you would do, or just this incredible desire to gratify yourself. I had them divorced in my mind.
I agree, man, because I lived a split life, until I actually, lost everything and got sober and started dealing with all of that. It was a split life.
Yeah. So what would you say, what life experience had the greatest impact on you?
I got to say, I had two that had the greatest impact on me. The first one didn't have anything to do with being gay. The first one was when I was, in Texas in 8th grade, in 7th grade, you have to take a public speaking course. And the lady who was my public speaking teacher, she said, you need to take this again in 8th grade when it's an elective. So I did. And my 8th grade public speaking teacher one day invited the high school debate coach down to listen to me speak. And after that, I gave that speech. And after class that day, this lady, her name was Miss Copeland, came up to me and she says, do you know what debate is? And I said, generally. And she says, well, I have a competitive debate team in high school, and I think you would be good at it. But you need to go to Baylor Debate Camp. Baylor's the university here in Texas in Waco. Yes. You need to go to Baylor Debate Camp, and you need to learn how to debate. I don't have time to teach you. I need you to hit the ground running. And I thought, oh, great. I get to go to a camp. And then I thought, does it cost money? And she said, yes, it's expensive. And then my heart just dropped. So I went home and I told him, and I gave this note to my dad, and he goes, we didn't have a phone in those days. And he goes next door to the neighbors and calls this lady. A couple of weeks pass. Then my dad calls me in to talk to me, and he says, look, these two ladies, that's how he talked. These two ladies are really bugging me about this debate camp at Baylor. Is this something you want to do? And I said, yes, Dad, yes, I want to do it. I think I'd be good at it. And he says, it costs $300. And we're talking 1979 money, 78 money. And he says, I have saved $125 working overtime. These ladies, they're going to pitch in the rest.
Wow.
For you to go to debate camp.
Wow.
And that was a life-changing moment to me, because when I got to that debate camp, I was with different kind of people. I lived in we had a decent house, but, I was around folks whose aspirations were not too terribly high, except for my dad's. He was going to get rich somehow. And I was around all these really smart kids and competitive kids. And boy, the bug bit me at that debate camp. And I learned how to prepare and to present and to speak. And it changed there was no doubt. I knew by the end of that debate camp, I wanted to be a lawyer, and not just a lawyer. I wanted to be a trial lawyer. I wanted to talk to juries, and I wanted to talk to people. So that was a life-changing moment. The next life-changing moment I had did regard me being a gay guy. I referenced earlier about I had this kind of secret relationship with a guy when I was 16. He was a debater at another high school, and we were 16, and we were feeling our way through all of this stuff, figuring out how can you tell if someone desires you and they're a boy and all of that. We figured that out, and we had this really great relationship the summer of '81. Then I repressed. I didn't have another gay relationship. I tried to be straight. I dated women, had sex with women, all in the desire that maybe I could curb this, I could change myself. Finally, when, I just couldn't take it anymore, I picked up the phone and I called this guy. His name was Rob. I called Rob. And remember, I'm 28 at this point. And I said, if I came to Houston this weekend, could we go to dinner? And he said, sure. And we met for dinner that weekend. And I saw him. We sat down. And I just started crying, Tim. And he just reaches over and he touches my hand and he says, are you still struggling? And I said, yes. And he just said, let's go outside. So we walked to his car. And Rob had come out already. He was out at work. He was out to his friends. He was out to his family. And he had gone through this process. And I remember we sat in that car with me crying and him saying, look, you got people who love you. You live in the Dallas-Fort Worth area. There's a gay community up there. And he says, not all of it will be easy, but he says, you can do this. And he says, you can call, you can lean on me. And he says, I did it. And I was scared to death too. But this way, this self-hatred and this denial, you can't live with it. So you got to walk through the door. So after that night, I sort of got myself together and I started the very slow process of coming out to people. Those were two very life-changing events for me right there.
Okay, so this brings me to, this is usually the last question, but because the last of my 10 questions, but this kind of fits. I call this the threshold. And this is the point of no return. You've walked through that door, and when you look back, there's no door anymore. The wall has been painted over. There's nothing. You can't go back. There's no way. There's no turning back. There's no nothing. And you have to go forward from that point on. Okay, so how did you know when you arrived there? How did it feel to cross it? What was the significance to you? What did you leave behind? What are you glad behind? And what do you regret leaving behind? Now we can go over this point by point if you like.
I think for me, that moment arrived. I like to joke with people. It happened when I was 33 years old, and Christ was 33 when he was crucified. So I love making that comparison. So that moment for me, Tim, is easy to identify in my life. When I had lost everything, literally lost everything due to my drinking. I was back home living with my parents in Houston. My dad had gone off on a job, and I had spent 8 months doing nothing but standing in my mom and dad's garage, getting drunk every day, not working, not doing anything, not even trying. And one day I woke up and I was spread eagle on my back on the concrete in the garage in my mom and dad's house. And I had pissed on myself. I had crapped on myself. And I sat there just kind of woozy going, I can't live my life drinking, but yet I can't stop. So I managed to get myself up, and I knew I had saved 20, 40 milligram Valiums. And I grabbed my dad's Johnny Walker Black. And at that moment, I poured the Valium in my hand and I unscrewed the Johnny Walker Black. And I said, I think I need to do this because I can't quit drinking. I tried everything to quit drinking, Tim, everything. And I remember thinking, boy, mom doesn't deserve to find me this way. And my buddy, I had a buddy who was a doctor. His name was AJ, and he told me 3 or 4 times. He says, there's a place called Hazelden in Minnesota. They're the best. And he says, you need to call them. Just call them. Whenever you think you're at a place, just call them. And for whatever reasons, I said, well, let me call them. And I called this place at Hazelden. And there was a boy on the phone called Tim. And we talked for 2.5 hours that day. And by the time we talked, I had gotten sober. And he had told me, I have a place for you. This was on January 3rd. He says, I have a place for you on January 8th. Can you call me every day and talk to me, please, between now and January 8th? And I said, I don't have any health insurance and I don't have any money. And he said, well, we'll have to figure that out. And he says, you got to make an effort here. And in a fit of paranoia, Tim, in my drinking days, I had sent a bunch of money to my buddy Greg because I thought, I don't know what I thought. I was just a paranoid freaking mess. And I called my buddy Greg. He and I had met in college on the phone. And I said, Greg, I described the situation. And he just said, don't give me that guy's name and don't worry about it anymore. So next thing I know, I get a call from Tim saying, get a flight. I talked to your buddy Greg. It's handled. Just get here. And that's what I did. And that was the moment that I walked across a line where I decided I couldn't live this way as an addict and an alcoholic anymore. That was huge for me. When I got home, one of the biggest changes is I spent 28 days in rehab, and I was broke and didn't have a job. I had to go home to a house where my father, who was a belligerent active alcoholic, and my mom. And my dad picked me up at the airport, and he was drunker than a damn shithouse rat whenever he picked me up at the airport. And he spent the entire ride back to the house saying, I hope they taught you to drink like me. And you just need to be like me and know how to drink right. And he says, I'm not good. You're a teetotaler now. And it was just really a hard ride home. And when I got home, my sister, Carrie Tate, my younger sister, and my mom were there. And my sister, Carrie Tate, asked my mom, she said, Mom, did you go to any more Al-Anon meetings, which is a 12-step group that for the friends and family of alcoholics to help them cope with alcoholics? And my dad just lit into my mom. Are you going to fucking go to more of those meetings? Sorry for the language. And you're not going to get me to quit drinking, blah, blah, blah. At that moment, my little sister touched me. And she said, you can't live here. Come live with me. And I remember thinking I'd always been there to kind of get in the way between Dad's meanness toward my mom. I always the one that tried to get in the way of it. And I knew how mean he would be if I walked out because I left. But I just had to make a decision for me. And I didn't want to make it. And I didn't want to go. But I did. And so I was lucky enough to have a sister significantly younger than me who had just gotten married, who was only 3 months into a marriage, and an angel of a brother-in-law. And they're just fresh out of rehab, out of work, broke brother-in-law and brother came to live with them for 9 months, and
that's pretty substantial.
Yeah. And that was when I started getting on my feet.
And
what I had to leave behind was this relationship with my dad because he was toxic. And he was a drunk, and I had to leave that relationship behind. And I left it behind until I was evolved enough in my sobriety to where I could deal with my dad as a sober man, which took some time. And when I look back, what I feel like I left behind in all of that, I don't regret anything that I left behind. But what I regret is how long it took me, I guess, because when it came to coming out to everybody, Tim, my friends were also gracious. And I think they were a little bit hurt that something that was so essential to who I am, and that is being gay, that I didn't trust them enough to share it. And I think that was the sentiment I got more than any other, is no one ever rejected me for being gay.
No.
But I think they were a little hurt that I didn't trust them sooner. And so I regret the feeling that I didn't say it sooner, that I didn't tell people sooner, because I get that feeling like, maybe I let them down a little bit, because they did love me. Come to find out, Tim, after all that bullshit I put through myself in my head about being gay, the people that said they loved me, they really did.
Yeah.
And that was a special thing for me.
I can remember being two things when I first started coming out. I was a little bit more attractive, let's say, and whenever I would go in any place, and I favored a few places in Chelsea over and the West Village over most other areas of the city, and I didn't realize that other men didn't have a reception committee when you walked into a gay bar, and everyone else is like, "No, you idiot!" Like, well, I just thought that you always had like 5 or 6 guys waiting for you, and I didn't have a stumbling block, and was another thing too. It was like drinking wasn't the main thing, because I was trying to get laid. So I want to make sure that I was as trim as I could be, and alcohol, being Irish, and like Irish just puts the weight on. So I was very conscious of how much I consumed. But then when I started coming out of work, it became one of those things where I was one of, but I was, for the area I worked in, I was the gay. So I wasn't rejected by any stretch, but I was the confessor.
Mm-hmm.
And I was so surprised at how ready so many people were to unload their own issues on me, thinking that because I'm gay, I would understand, or I would be the shoulder they could cry on. So I wound up being that guy for many, many people. And they're all really relatively inconsequential things. They just said these people had to get these little things off their chest, and they didn't have substance abuse issues for the most part, but they didn't know who they could talk to. And this is going back with decades. So it's a very different story now. I'm 63 years old. So when I came out and I see people I know who are much younger than me. And for them, they had a PFLAG in school. They had a gay, lesbian, straight alliance. They had all the support, and people were educated and trained in how to deal with integrating you and making you feel welcome, and motivating you. And the last thing anybody where I went to, this Catholic all boys high school, was to acknowledge that you were gay. I mean, you weren't even supposed to even say that you had sex. Not, let alone acknowledging you're gay, and everything was a sin. So when I first started doing that, I was so surprised at how few resources there were for so many people, and now we're so incredibly much more aware of the concept of mental health, as opposed to just saying, "Oh, you're crazy." We understand now, and it's happened remarkably fast in a relatively short period of time. How enlightened people have gone from almost shunning people with issues that impact their mental health to now embracing the importance of mental health in every situation. And we never placed this premium on it before, and it's quite a difference than it had been just 10 years ago. we never thought of putting this is the most important thing, especially when it comes to like work environments. You'd have an issue, and then people would become standoffish, and then they would remove themselves from the person who had an issue. Or even had recently work issues with people where, you have to look to your colleagues and make sure that they were doing okay, because there was a difficult situation. And they're much more enlightened. Even people who aren't particularly well educated, they still understand this to a much greater degree than just relatively recently. So it's a surprise. It's a pleasant surprise to me that so many people are placing the priority on this. But it wasn't that long ago, and it was so self-destructive. I mean, you don't realize how much damage you're doing to yourself. Now, my oldest friend's wife, and I've known my oldest friend since kindergarten, and I've known his wife since 1983. And she always mentioned the town that we grew up in Long Island. She said that's the town where everybody dies. And it was true. We had such a tremendous amount of drug abuse and substance abuse that it was uncanny how many people who did not achieve maturity. They died young. I mean, as young. Self-destructive drugs, car accidents, drunk driving, or illness caused by substance abuse.
Yeah.
And we had that as something that was completely looked at as a totally different animal than it is now. I mean, and we have come leaps and bounds since then. But I can tell you, I've buried so many people, male and female, and having been there, everything from heroin abuse to heroin addiction and to cirrhosis, to car accidents, to all different types of illnesses that were brought on or exacerbated because of the self-destructive behavior. And a lot of it was condoned because the general atmosphere was to overindulge in this type of thing. So if you lose one, it's not as drastic as if you're the only one and oh my God. Because it was something to be expected to a degree. I guess it was burnt into people's brains from the time they were young. So I understand the struggle is something that we really have to be conscious of all the time. And I think the more you're around people who offer you affirmation, it's a whole lot easier to see things through without having to resort to something because you're faced with something that might be insurmountable in your mind, even though it's probably something you could deal with a lot easier than you thought. It's just that there's nobody to give you instruction. Nobody gave me instructions on how to be a gay man, and nobody told me how if something was going to impact me, I could still deal with it. And I could actually deal with it and incorporate it. And I had to find that out on my own for the most part, for a tremendous amount of my life. And then I become a touch point when I worked for NBC, and I had been the event lead for Out at NBC Universal, which was the largest ERG in the company. And then New York, New Jersey was the largest chapter. We had the most people, thousands and thousands of people in it. And because I was the most I won't say prominent. I don't have to say that too much. It says a little too much about me. But I became a touchstone for so many people to come out. And they came out and they just needed to know that there was somebody who was not going to be judgmental, somebody's going to be supportive, somebody's going to be accepting, and very encouraging. And I knew that was my mission. I had to do this because once this is thrust upon you and you realize this is how people are looking at you, well, that's a lot of responsibility, and you have to live up to that because I have to be that.
Push back on it or embrace it. And it's good that you embraced it because that helped a lot of people. That helped a lot of people.
I'm that's one of the things I'm proud of. I mean, one of the things I think I did was I helped people. I won't say effortlessly, but I mean, I facilitated it for a lot of people, and there was a whole load of people still up until I had left the company that were, they had their foot on the saddle of the door of the closet. They were in, they were out, and it depended on their culture, and it depended on the time of year. At the end, because at the end of last week of June of every year, the Great Gay Pride, the original Gay Pride, which is in New York City, is always on the last Sunday in June. So the last week, I would have probably a dozen guys tentatively come out, and then they'd be back in the closet again. But they weren't really in the closet, but they just weren't, out loud and proud. As soon as Pride was over, I think they got carried away in the emotion and the cavalcade of rainbow flags, and then they decided, well, that's all right. I got that worked out of myself, so I can go back to being the low level gay that I am. So I had that. So
out for Pride.
well, and it's like increments. And I always say, you are who you are in your own time, unless you hurt other people. Right. If you hurt other people, then all bets are off. And you actually have to accept the responsibility for being malevolent, I guess it is, but most people really, it takes them forever. I do remember when I was in the closet, I would go to in New York City, there was a whole load of places that you could go to for drink and have sex, and there was different types of bars or clubs. And there was one I went to, and there was a lawyer, and I'd see him on a regular basis. And part of the reason that I'd see him all the time was because A, we recognized each other, B, he was well dressed, and C, he had a tremendous amount of drugs he was willing to share. So I would see him, and I would go, and I would play with him in this place, and it was crowded, and it was a well-known place, and in his mind, he was convinced, and there was absolutely nothing that I could do to change his mind. He was convinced that every single person in that place was in the closet too. Mm-hmm. And he just couldn't grasp that other people were out and they were living a life, and they didn't feel marginalized. They weren't choreographers or nurses or something traditionally associated with a sissy life and pushed to the edges. People were doctors, and they worked in the banks, and they were a stockbroker and stuff like that. Or you could do anything. And he just refused to, because he had achieved the lawyer status before he started to spiral, because he was using the drugs, and he was gratifying himself in very unsafe ways. And
I appreciate that, because that's very similar to my story.
Yeah, and I had another guy who was a doctor too, and he was engaged, and I just couldn't understand how their culturally rich background refused to let them incorporate who they are. So they had to live a double life. And I always say actors, gay people are the best actors, because they are living a double life all the time. You have to keep all your lies straight. So, and which is murderous. And as soon as I let go of that, I was like, oh my God, this is so much better to live like this. Mm-hmm. I don't have to pretend. And it's, you feel so feeble when you're talking about something that you're really not. It's like saying you're the strongest man in the world, and then picking up 5 pounds and trying to prove it. That was the same thing as trying to be straight. Like it's not, you're not fooling anybody. So all you're doing is putting yourself through a tremendous amount of stress. And then, of course, you're giving fodder to somebody who may not be nice and wants to humiliate you. And they'll bring up those points, and they'll do that to you. And now you're stuck. You're deer under the headlights, and now you've got no place to go, and you've got to respond, or you could skulk away. And of course, you've been humiliated again. So by being out, it makes it a lot easier. My sister-in-law, my brother lives on Long Island, close to where I grew up. He bought a house, and my sister-in-law is there too. We went to visit, and I went to go visit, and the town next to them was very well-to-do. And we went outside. We were going shopping or doing something locally, and there was a cafe, and there was a table with two young gay men in it, and they saw me, and I don't advertise that I'm gay, but I guess my gayness comes out, as I'm walking, because I'm not a particularly queenie guy. That was another thing too, which when I first came out, the people who were gay in bars, there's the parasites or the gnats, the people who come at you at first, they're very predatory, and they turn a lot of people off, and they make people go back in the closet, because you don't realize these guys are just they're just taking pot shots, and they're seeing if they get anything. And then the fact that gay men who were queenie, they taught me they were the bravest people of all, because they had no choice. They couldn't. There was no way they were going to hide who they were. And they've been, as they say, they've been out since hatching, and they were the most sensual. They were the most physically in touch with their minds and their bodies, and they taught me an awful lot. So put that all together, and I saw things through a very, very different lens than a lot of people, and it just reinforced how I became that touch point to other people. So anyway, let's see now. We have a few more questions to ask us. I have now. What is your Zen at this point in your life?
What is my Zen?
Yeah.
Yeah, my Zen is, I'm at heart, I'm a homebody. And my Zen is a quiet house with my husband and with our dog Emerson. And I like being at home better than any other place in the whole world, which is very unlike. I mean, home was always a tumultuous place for me growing up, but my home is very peaceful with two beings that love me very much, that I love. So that's my Zen. It's being at home with my husband and my dog.
And I completely understand that. And then that's something else that's changed dramatically in the last few years. Also, I'm not someone who knows, I know absolutely nothing about dating apps, as they call them. So I am completely divorced from that mentality in the world. And I don't make it, I wouldn't want to make it a thing that we were ever aware of. So I am definitely somebody who has seen these, and I think we've also had peak dating hookup apps. I think they're going to go down as well now too, because they had their moment. But the first response was that it was an alternative to anonymous sex in a dangerous place, and it turns out that most of those places were safer because there was somebody monitoring you and making sure that you were accounted for, and not you could just like wind up in a ditch somewhere. So what's the first thing you want to come to people's minds when they think of you?
Stability. And that may seem like a very boring word, but I had such a tumult going up and down with my alcoholism over the years, and my dad moved us so much whenever I was little. I like being known as someone who's steady and who's stable, and that you can always come to, and there's always going to be there, and you're always going to get a thoughtful, clear-headed response. And I taught for 20 years as an adjunct professor at the University of Houston. I taught communications, law, and ethics, and it's probably my favorite job yet was teaching those students. And that's one of the things that I wanted to be for them over the years, is just someone that they could go to that was thoughtful and that was steady. And it was a great joy to me. I stopped teaching during the pandemic, and I just chose not to go back. But yeah, not very exciting, but what I want to be known for.
That's terrific. And there's the other thing that I was going to say about the pandemic. One of the things that it shifted was people's this almost compulsory need to go out and be out in the. It's nowhere near like that in New York City at all anymore. Now I live on 23rd Street, which is one of the few crosstown streets, and I had been complaining for decades about the noise at night. because you'd have trucks and you'd have cars and people honking, and you'd hear people honking from 9th Avenue going all the way over to 5th Avenue, and you'd wonder what kind of a person they were when they got home, because
Yeah.
all you're doing is being a hothead and just like either slow down or realize that you can't go 90 miles an hour, or don't do this. But I mean, you're the one who's causing the issues, and that seems to have evaporated. So at
Yeah.
10 o'clock on a Friday night or Saturday night in New York, even 8 o'clock, it's quiet now. So I think a lot of people have actually have come to the point where everything in New York City is a lot earlier now than it used to be. It used to be a much later city. The city never sleeps. Well, they're up. It's there. This still goes on, but it's not everywhere. Not by any stretch at all. So people, I think, have actually embraced the idea that you do feel a little bit better without tiring yourself out and neglecting your home life. And I think that may have gained a foothold into culture stronger than I thought it was going to, because I thought it was going to be back as soon as we possibly could. But I look out the window and I see my neighbors in their home at night, so which is a thing I think is pretty good. I do know that the liquor stores make a lot of money delivering now. so maybe,
That's right.
so
you can deliver. Yeah, I love it. Yep.
So, okay, here's another question. What gets you up in the morning?
Oh, what drives me and gets me up in the morning? I love talking and sharing with people about this shame. And, I spent so much of my life bathed in this shame about being gay. And I spent another good chunk of my life being ashamed that I was poor all the time. And another good chunk of my life ashamed that I was a drunk. And over time, I recognize that when you're soaking yourself in alcohol, and when you're steeping in shame and scarcity all the time, there's no way that you can be resilient. And I feel like people need to be resilient, particularly in this day and age, particularly having just come through a pandemic and how that changed things. And I think we're born resilient, but our world sort of sucks it away from us. So I like that. I like sharing stories about overcoming shame and being resilient. It does get me up in the morning. And that's one of the things that I hope the book, Sunday Dinners, Moonshine, and Men does, is as I walk through a lot of this stuff, I hope folks realize that shame is not something that shadows us for the rest of our life if we decided to start being honest and being of service to others.
Yeah, I think there's a tremendous amount of, I think once you realize if you belong to something that's bigger than you want to make a positive impact, and you want to contribute.
Right.
And I think a lot of people, I found when I was younger, it used to turn me off a lot about other gay men when I got to know them. It seemed like they threw the baby out with the bathwater when they came out in terms of their ethics and their morality. So you don't have to indulge yourself all the time. Everything isn't one series of how high can I get and how many people can I sleep with. There's plenty of time for all of those things, but it doesn't have to be like you're on driving 100 miles an hour down the endless highway. Like don't worry about it. That can come and go, and then as you put them in perspective, you'll find your own water balance, and you'll figure out where you don't. Myself, I am somebody who is I'm sober about 7 months of the year, and I do this thing where I from St. Patrick's Day, because I'm a Pisces, and my birthday is just before St. Patrick's Day, up until the end of September, which is my husband's birthday. I don't drink. Mm-hmm. And then I do dry January. And people mistake me, or have mistaken me. And I've gone through years at a time too, where I don't imbibe in anything. And people think because of I give off or behaviors are recognized by people who are sober, they think I'm a 12-stepper. And I say, no, I'm not. I just don't. And they get a little confused because they can't understand how I can do this, and they're not. It's like, well, it's not something that overtakes my life. And I have alcoholism in my family, and I have other people who have experienced this. And I'm surprised at the consistency of the stories that so many people have with an abusive parent, with their own drinking, with their own issues, and how similar they are. I've had two people who I've spoken to, I've interviewed, who became addicted to meth, and how quickly they spiraled, and how down they went from what was a promising life to they were living in their car and they were going around the world for just to get enough money to get their next high, and how differently that has come. And I've never felt that need where I had to do all of that, and there was points where I did too much, and I have had, like I said, I had buried a lot of people, and I'd seen people just go down and down and down, and there's nothing you can do for that person except be there when they need a hand. But if they're going to do it, you can't yell it out of somebody.
That's right. They got to get there their own way. I mean, we all have to get to our truth our own way.
Yeah. And as I say, sooner or later, everybody, you are who you are in your own time. And I just hope that you find your time so you can actually experience the life that you're supposed to be. And that's something that even in Manhattan, you still see people struggling with this on a daily basis. And it's something that it's universal. So if I want, I'm actually curious because I'd like to know about this. How does your book help uncover the Deep South's hidden LGBTQ plus history?
Because I walked through that and I talk about it in the book. When I grew up in North Carolina, there was not one single gay person, not one. No one said that they were gay. And in the churches that I went to and were a part of, they consistently made a point of condemning any behavior that could be considered gay. You were an abomination. And when you were branded that, you weren't just called that, but you were branded that. So, and that is the history, particularly of the small town South. I still have a cousin to this day that says, to this day, and it's 2023, that lives in the same area. And she says she is out and she lives with, she's a lesbian and lives with the person that she loves, and that they just don't talk about it. It's still there today, so the book goes through that history in the South. And my experience is the same experience that so many people did that grew up in the Deep South. And it's really one of my great fears now. So much down here, we're walking backwards in a lot of areas. Yes. on the rights that and the acceptance of the queer community in the South. And a lot of that is that the reactionary forces are trying to push that back. So it's kind of one of my big concerns right now. But that push and pull of sort of liberation for the queer community and sort of the reactionary forces, they want to put it back in the closet. It continues to this day.
Well, I've always said that, and as someone, I consider myself a skeptical agnostic after being raised a Roman Catholic and an Irish Roman Catholic. My mother was from Ireland, so she
that's
never
a real deal, man, right there.
Never once ever heard my mother, my dear sweet departed mother. I never once heard her use foul language. And they were devout Catholics. My dad was a devout Catholic. And one of the things that I noticed, and it never came out of my parents, it never came out of my parents because they were trying to be real Catholics. But for religion, for so many people is, and I think it's part of the construct of religion is the impossibility to live up to the ideals of your religion causes a lot of stress And people can't possibly be somebody who's perfect. And that's what you're trying to emulate. And there's a huge disparity. So one of the things that I think organized religions do is they sanction forms of hate, and they disguise it as different things. So when you can actually separate, and it's also it's part of the classics as old as man, is like separate the other and make them the enemy that you're saving them from. So you can be a perfect or a good, upstanding religious a member of your religious community, and you can be rewarded for your good activities, but you can also be rewarded for outright venomous hatred of certain groups, specifically gay people too.
Yeah.
And you're less than human, and everything is prefaced with something that is the pejorative prefix about gay people. You're faggy something, you're this, and the fairy, and it's always something you can't, everything, it has to be predicated on that first. And that is something that I think it's like a release valve for people. And then they walk around feeling fine. But you don't realize you violated the tenets of everything you're supposed to stand for. But but it's okay because you've been told you can do that and still be a good practicing member of your faith.
Mm-hmm. So
So I think, and I think that's one of the things that people have to come to, an awareness of if they're going to integrate and grow, and self-internalize homophobia does that as well, because you really want to be accepted by the people you've grown up with, who now that you're an adult, you get your chance to have some sort of stature and some sort of position. And if you violate what other people believe in, you lose all of that. And that's why we keep on seeing these pictures of all these politicians, in Motel 6s with an underage male, and they've got a meth pipe, and like, you've been busted because like, you can't possibly be, and and there's so many of them, and I still don't understand what the common denominator is that has so many of them attracted to people underage. I just cannot figure out what is.
I think Tim, I think it's repression. I think when you are people who live with intense repression of who you are, that somehow you gravitate to the most vulnerable, because you feel like that you can take advantage of them and you can get by with it. And that's why I think you see it. I think repression creates that attraction to the vulnerable and the younger. I think when you're out and you can be your authentic self, and you're not repressing and demeaning yourself with this shame, then so much of that tendency goes away. And vulnerable populations.
Oh yeah, and I had. There were so many places that in Chelsea that had popped up, that it became very popular, and they became locuses for people to come from all over the tri-state area, and even international travels. Even now, Chelsea is known internationally for sex tourism, and it's the highest area of sexually transmitted illnesses in the state of New York, because we still have places you can go to, buddy booths and sex clubs and everything, and people know this. It's an underground network, and they go there, and people become, they suffer from what do they call them again? It's autoimmune diseases, and we had places that opened up, and they're virtually all gone, that were popular bars. And there was one bar that was really, really popular, and it was called Splash. And it turns out that not only was it really popular, and it became legendary, and it finally it burnt out. It turns out that most of the staff was on meth, which was really bizarre. But around the corner, for people who could not get into Splash, they had a bar that catered to the twinks. And we went there once or twice. And one time I was there, and we really felt creepy.
Mm-hmm.
And one time we were there, and I was a little bit more worked out. I was a little bit younger, and I was sitting there with my husband. and two boys who were about 19 or 20 years old, who were Faye and Twinkie. They were very skinny and they looked boyish. One of them put his arm around my bicep and squeezed it and called me daddy and tried to like hit on me that way. And I was just like, please, I am not going to do this. This is just this. I can't do this with you. I don't want to be this guy. I don't want to do that. And I don't like that idea. And I think, in some way, I think the little mercenaries in them come out and they think they're going to get something out of somebody who's a little bit older than them, or
Right.
they're generally attracted to older guys. But for me, I think the vulnerable populations who these guys represented, whoever was owning this bar, you were exploiting this, because this was something that there was not something that I wanted to see or be part of. And I think that's a part of the whole thing. Is just like we still everywhere. There are vulnerable aspects of the population who are drawn, and themselves are drawn to people older than them because they want something. And I've never seen that, because when I was a kid, I remember the first time I'd ever gone to a gay bar was a place called Boots and Saddle, which is on Christopher Street, which is now closed. I think it's a sushi bar now. But it used to call it Bras and Girdles. The very first time I'd ever been to a gay bar, I paced back and forth that place. I staked it out from a block away. I looked up and down. I was making sure that nobody I knew was going to recognize me, because who else was going to be in the West Village at that particular time of night? It's like it was never going to happen. And I remember going in there and ordering a drink at the bar. And I was wearing a coat my mom gave me. So I was 19, and an old man, he had to be 30, who was professional, and he was well dressed and well groomed, offered to buy me a drink. He had a smile on his face. I said, "No, thank you." And I ran out, and I literally ran out of the bar, because that was my first interaction actually acknowledging another human being who was gay. And he wanted to buy me a drink, and he obviously had something else on his mind. And I just could not go. I was like, no, boys should find out about sex from each other. And as you grow older, you should do that. But it shouldn't be, I'm 19 or I'm 16 and you're 30. That's a little weird to me. Mm-hmm. So, but that's just my own personal experience. That's my own, based on my own personal experience. So I think the vulnerable part is really, really essential to understand that we're just as guilty by our desires, because we have ulterior motives, as the people are who take advantage of the innocent, So there's a combination. I'd say it weighs heavily on the pedophile, but there are boys who definitely see opportunity in somebody who's a little bit older than them. And that weirds me out a little bit. And I see it. And of course, just because they're so blasé right now at this point, when they're walking around, like, you don't understand. I've been gay bashed twice. We got the living shit kicked out of us all the time. We had to hide. Gay bars never had a direct line of sight. You couldn't see directly into a place, because if you did, someone could come in, you get arrested, you could lose your job, you could lose your life. Or you could just get beat up by someone who recognized you. And it turns out to me that all the people who I was afraid of were going to beat me up if I went to a bathhouse, they were the ones who were the most interested in me. Because I was terrified of them. They looked tough, but they were as gay as I was. But yeah, we had to make sure that we weren't being exploited, even though some people were very willing thralls. I felt that that's taking a almost obsessive psychological desire just to exploit younger people, and the bar next door to us that closed down, closed in scandal last year or a few years ago. Turns out the owner had, and I saw at the end of August, I looked out my window and I saw that they had taken 2 beds out of the basement. They had actually created rape rooms, and they were telling 18 and 19-year-old kids that they were going to make them stars, like a Bryan Singer movie type of thing. It turns out Bryan Singer was one of the investors in the place, and these kids were not stupid. They're New York kids who, a lot of them go to NYU, and their parents are attorneys and doctors in the tri-state area, and they got wise to this, and and made law enforcement and other people aware of this, because this was something that had to come to a head. And there's a lot of exploitation, I'll say that. And I'm not waiting for this place to reopen, and I think they still own the lease, and they're going to reopen under a different name. And there's something that I'm going to be opposed to from the second they open the doors. So anyway, I want to go. I was a slight diversion from that. I think the idea was that so many people do exploit the vulnerables, and they need to be protected. And I think it's not enough to just say no thank you, or just to give a disdainful look to somebody who's doing something. You really have to get involved in a way that won't confront the people who are doing what they're doing, but also enlighten the younger people, because you really should be between each other, not you're not going to find, you're just going to be used, and they're going to treat you terribly after you've been.
I think part of the issue is, though, Tim, is that these kids need the support that they need, and that helps in that regard. And certainly, whenever so many of these people that I feel like when you these kids, these younger people need to know that they can give in a loving, supportive environment, and they don't need, and they don't need to be made stars. They're stars already, and that they can come into a loving and accepting community. And so I think that helps. That helps, and it needs to be everywhere, where these young people have that loving and accepting community, to where perhaps they're not drawn to being to anything other than that. And in addition to that, we have to be mindful as a community. I feel like that when we see issues of exploitation like you described, that we step in and we stop it. It's important for us as a community to recognize it and to do something about it.
Yeah, and I think the other thing too, there's a few other things too that are really are, especially in New York, they're really highlighted, because we have very welcoming. We live with each other. We love each other. We're great with each other. But if you go to certain neighborhoods, it's still 1953. Yeah. So if I was to go to Brooklyn and Brighton Beach, it's like it's very unlikely you're going to find gay people, but they're the ones who go out to all the clubs in Hell's Kitchen. Yeah. And they went out for a night on the town with their friends. It's like, yes, they did, but they, and I don't know if you know about the gay murders in New York City. People who were using a combination of drugs, including lidocaine and cocaine and fentanyl and something else. I forget the name of it. They were paralyzing these guys who they didn't even know. There was somebody looking as a stakeout, and they were looking at anybody using facial recognition on their phone to pay for their drinks, and they'd go, and they would get to the guy, and they would drop something in their drink, which would paralyze them. And then these 2 or 3 of these guys would go up to the bartender and go, or the bouncer and go, "Oh, my friends had too much," and they take them out, and they drop them off, and they get in the back of a cab, and they just use the kid's face to open up and drain his bank accounts, and then they leave them there, and they die. They take them someplace, and there was at least 2 deaths and 16 attacks that happened, and then 21 other attacks and 5 deaths in the straight community for people doing the exact same thing. So the question of exploiting vulnerable people is terrible. We gotta go. Okay, so let's say you also work as a prejudice reduction trainer. How did that influence your book?
I did my prejudice reduction training, some time ago, and I did it once I had come to grips with being, a gay man. When I became accepting of a gay man, and the world that I saw still had so much prejudice and so much bias against gay people, and so how that specifically that prejudice reduction training affected the book was, as I went through writing the book, I recognized that sharing this, not only my story, but the stories of others in the books that had been a part of my life, and sort of, raising that consciousness that that we can be our true and our authentic selves. We can be honest, and that being honest about how we feel and being honest about who we are goes such a long way in eliminating prejudice and bias. I'll circle back to what I said about, Harvey Milk saying, when he was saying, come out wherever you are. That was so true. When people started coming out and they realized it was their brother, it was their uncle, it was their neighbor across the street that they adored that was gay, that when they did that, when they were honest about who they were, that the acceptance in the community and across the country began to grow. So that drove a lot of it, and making that point in the book was important to me.
Well, that's terrific. And as I say, there's so much education that needs to be done for so many of the people. One of the other points I was going to make about the vulnerable people is, and also the different neighborhoods, is the highest percentage of people who are being infected with HIV in the city, and they have and there's a number of autoimmune pharmacies in Chelsea. That deals specifically with everybody with Hep C to all different sexually transmitted illnesses, including HIV. The highest percentage are 19 to 25-year-old Latino youths who are they're stereotypically they're the children of single parents. Mom has got to do so many other things besides just take care of you, so you're on your own for the most part. Mom was unlikely to be a great student, so you probably weren't a great student. You barely got out of school. You don't have much in terms of skills, and you're talked into coming downtown to these places for $20. You can do whatever you want with these people. And they're given a hit of meth to chill everything out, and the next thing you know, they're a thrall to a cheap thrill, and they're using these terrible drugs to get. And I can point to YouTube, and there are literally thousands of documentaries about this, and they're based in Chelsea, because Chelsea being the locus of so much of this, and meth being the underlying fabric of all of this is crystal meth, believe it or not. And when people talk about personal choices, and if people talk about responsibility, what they're alluding to is they're skirting the fact we have to actually confront this, because the crystal crisis in this country, and the fact that the gay people are so much more higher in substance abuse than the rest of the population. The rest of the population struggles with 10 to 15%. Gay people struggle with 25 to 35%. Gay people are, believe it or not, 10 times more likely than straight people to use meth, and 12 times more likely than straight people to use heroin. And I've known enough people who have died from heroin, and I've known enough people who have died from meth.
Like at Lambda Center, what I talked about where I got sober, we had CMA meetings, which were crystal meth meetings. They were 12-step recovery groups that specifically address the issues that came, because there's no doubt that crystal meth has afflicted our queer community a great deal, and literally to the point to where there is a 12-step recovery system just for crystal meth. So I would agree that it's been a particular affliction of our community, but there is help out there. There is certainly help out there, particularly in the urban areas. And I know, like here in Houston, we have CMA meetings just for that. So yeah, I would agree. It's
affliction. It's an affliction of a lot of vulnerable people.
Yeah.
Well, one of the guys I know, actually, the strangest thing of all, is he's one of the best known promoters in the country, and he's been a member of NA since I think probably about 1993. He was a manager of a bar, and there was a bar in my neighborhood where the owner had two bars, and he was literally a saint. He hired gay people who were shunned and who were marginalized, and they were going to die. They were going to be thrown out of their homes. And he hired them and gave them jobs in the bar, when everyone else was just, if you had HIV, that was it. You were gone. Like this is in Manhattan in 1991. You would still be completely shunned. So by showing gay men who were still human beings, they didn't turn them to some like this disgusting blob, like a science fiction thing. and they were still capable and doing what they were doing, he gave people a lot of dignity. And this one guy, he went on to leave this bar and to go to that other place that I called Splash. That was big deal, and everybody became addicted to meth. He's one of the biggest advocates of NA. He goes to all the meetings, and and he stays in great shape. And he's been doing this for 30 years. He's been really working, and I don't think he's even had a relapse. And he said 15 minutes after the first time he had sex, he was positive. And he had that, he was going down that path. He figured, well, the hell with it, since I'm already positive, I'm gonna, and he was spiraling down, and then somebody slapped him in the face, and he woke up, and he got a hold of himself, and he went back, and he became the picture of health, and all the things that he did, because he wasn't being as self-indulgent, and he wasn't so caught up in these really irrelevant aspects of who you are. So before we do anything else, how did your Southern upbringing shape your views on ethical decision-making and workplace respect?
I think for me, that was the first book I did. And I really wrote the book, Successful Ethical Decision-Making, Get What You Want Without Getting in Trouble, for my students. I think I shared with you earlier, I taught communications law and ethics for my students at the University of Houston. And I think that the Southern upbringing affected that particular book in that so much of the commentary about ethics for a lot of people, not just down South, but in other conservative cultures, is that the Bible or some sort of sacred text, whether it's the Quran or the Torah or whatever, is used as sort of as the definitive thing to think about ethics. And I think there's such an overtone, such a judgmental and sometimes morally condescending overtone by using those kind of texts to make to make decision making. So I really wanted to write a book that sort of took all of that out of it. So you didn't have to read St. Thomas Aquinas in order to learn about ethics, to where you could just use a very clear model. And I use the model of a fiduciary. A fiduciary, we have a fiduciary relationship, a lawyer and a client, a doctor and a patient. And the fiduciary is got to do what they say they're going to do. They got to do what they say they're going to do to the best of their ability. And that's just the basic idea of a successful ethical decision making. So I kind of wrote the book to kind of take that hardcore religion that I was around when I was young, so we could sort of take all of that out of it and make a good decision.
And I salute that, because as I said before, I met so many people who threw the baby out with the bathwater, and it's like, you have to have some ethics, and you have to implement them have to live by that. Otherwise, you're not gonna be around too long. And people aren't gonna want to have anything to do with you. So, can you discuss being very queer and very Southern, as Joshua Burford puts it?
Yeah, I think so. I think, I don't think that they're mutually exclusive from one another. I think I think that the culture may make the experience down South a little bit different than it is in other places, but I don't think they're mutually exclusive. I think you can be queer and Southern and reconcile them both, and live a serene life. May take a while, but you can get there.
I have a friend from Mississippi.
Yeah.
And he was the gay in his town or whatever it was. And he told me the story of when he lived in Mississippi, and he was a banker. This guy was a bright guy, and he came to New York and he got a job and he did very well. But he told me that he decided to go to Walmart, and instead of going to the Walmart in the town that he was in, he drove to the farthest one he could just to have something to do that day. He said by the time he came home, it was the biggest scandal.
Yeah.
Everybody knew about it. Everybody's aunt recognized his car. They called their cousin. They called his mother. And what were you doing there? How could you do this? As if this is some sort of personal affront that you went to a Walmart. You didn't tell other people, and you went shopping. You decided to go shop. It was just one of those things. I just couldn't. but that's very. I thought that was very Southern, and that wasn't even gay. But it was gay by the virtue of the fact that he was a man who went shopping,
Mhm. Yeah.
Okay, so what would you say was, and I'm sure we've covered this already, what would you say was the transformational moment in your life? A meaningful gift, a reason to belong to something, being a parent, good job, bad job. What was that moment? What was the thing that changed it?
Yeah, it was getting sober. It was for me that it was the decision to get sober, because the decision to get sober not only was a sort of a commitment to me being honest with myself, and a commitment to and a commitment, but part of being in a at least for me, and being a 12-step program, is this idea of honesty. And I had to start being honest with myself and those around me, and that's part of what the program requires. And I could not drink and I could not drug anymore, and that really helped me be a sober, proud, recovered gay man. And I would think that was the decision to get sober, and that opportunity to get sober.
Well, I guess that pretty much says, yeah.
Yeah.
I would imagine. So yes, I was going to say, so I don't really want to go too much farther. I think we've gotten to a lot of the points. I think there are a lot of overlapped in the questions and the suggested questions to talk about, and the
this
content.
has been fun, Tim. You're fun to hang out with, man.
I really appreciate it, and I thank you very much. And Tate, I hope all of your books and everything else met with great success, and the continued good wishes to you. And thanks so much for being part of 20Q.
I appreciate it, man. It's been fun.
Okay, thanks again, and have a great day.
You too.
Bye-bye now.